If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. Thorin Oakenshield to Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. So that was a quote from my Zibaldone journal. A Zibaldone journal is a collection of ideas. It could be your own ideas, it could be your own poems, it could be poems you collected, or famous quotations like from The Hobbit, like I just showed you. A Zibaldone is a catch-all for ideas. So you're probably not putting task lists and stuff like that, daily reminders, nothing like that, but it is a collection of ideas. Now, a lot of people today think that's what a commonplace book is. It's just a one-stop shop for all your ideas, but I think that's actually a Zibaldone journal. I think a commonplace book is a little bit different and can be used for different purposes. So in this video, I want to get into the nitty-gritty details. What is a commonplace book? How can we keep one? Why is it called Commonplace book? We're going to get into all of that. First, I'm going to give you my working definition of what a commonplace book is. Then I'll help you with the 4 kinds of commonplace books that you can keep so that you can determine which one is best for you. I'm going to run through that stuff pretty quick, but the majority of this video is going to be on commonplaces. What are those? And then I'm going to give you 3 different ways to start making your own commonplaces in order to organize your commonplace books and help you find the quotes that you've stored. This video is sponsored by Consensus, but more on that later. Let's jump right in with my working definition of a commonplace book. Okay, so if you're new to the channel, then this will all be new and fresh to you. If you are a returning viewer, then maybe you've seen some of this stuff before, but I promise we're going to break some new ground, especially down here. The bulk of the video is going to be new stuff. But even if you've seen this before, no worries, it's helpful to go over it again. So I know you're still going to get something out of this. So let's start with my working definition. A commonplace book is a collection of quotations usually kept in notebooks, which is organized according to a particular scope and for a particular purpose, often according to commonplaces or common headings. And we're going to talk about commonplaces in a second. But in this definition, I have a genus. That is the commonplace book. It is a collection of quotations. And I have 2 differentiae, 2 things that are going to help us differentiate one kind of commonplace book from another kind of commonplace book. The differentiae are purpose and scope. So let's start with the scope. You can have a general commonplace book or a topic-specific commonplace book. A general commonplace book is just going to be a collection of all of your favorite quotations from different genres, from different topics, from all your different studies. Everything is going into one general commonplace book. So the scope is general, the scope is unlimited. Whatever I'm reading, that's going in my commonplace book. A topic-specific commonplace book, on the other hand, is going to be limited in its scope to one topic, whether it's the philosophy of mind, whether it's justice, whether it's C.S. Lewis, whether it's fiction or science fiction or fantasy or cognitive science, whatever the case, you're going to limit that commonplace book and the quotations you put in that journal, in that notebook, you're going to limit that scope to a particular topic. So that's the first differentia, scope. The second differentia is purpose, and here we have a treasury commonplace book or a manuscript commonplace book. A treasury commonplace book is just going to be a storehouse for quotations. So you're just adding your quotations and nothing else. You're not adding any of your thoughts or anything about the quotations themselves. The only thing that goes in your treasury commonplace book is the quotations. A manuscript commonplace book, on the other hand, is going to include your thoughts on those quotations. So maybe you're doing some exegesis, maybe you're writing in the margins, maybe you're writing underneath, and you're manuscripting out a paper or a journal article or even a book. That's still a commonplace book because you're still collecting these quotations, but the purpose is to produce something with those quotations. So you're actually manuscripting out your thoughts on the quotations that you're collecting. Okay, so we have our genus, that is a commonplace book, which is a collection of quotations. We have 2 differentiae, scope and purpose. And under scope, we have a general or a topic-specific commonplace book. And under purpose, we have treasury and manuscript. So then we can mix and match these in like a Punnett square right here and come up with the 4 kinds of commonplace books. We have a general treasury commonplace book. This is a general scope commonplace book. Just pull in quotes from everywhere, and it's just going to be a storehouse of those quotations, nothing else. Don't add your own thoughts to this commonplace book. Then we have a general manuscript commonplace book. So the scope is still general. You're still pulling in quotations from all over, but you're going to be manuscripting out your own thoughts about those quotations. Next, we have a topic-specific treasury commonplace book. So you're going to limit the scope to one particular topic, but you're only adding the quotations in there, nothing else. And then lastly, we have a topic-specific manuscript commonplace books. You're adding quotations on a particular topic, but you're also adding your own thoughts on those quotations. Maybe you're thinking through the quotations and implications, you're doing exegesis, you're adding your own thoughts to the quotations right there in your commonplace book. So I actually keep commonplace books in all 4 of these categories. Super helpful for me to get clear on what's going on in what notebook. So you may find that just keeping one of these is enough for you, but if you start dabbling with it, you may end up keeping at least one of each kind. Sorry about that. So that was a pretty quick breakdown. If you want to see more about commonplace books and these 4 kinds of commonplace books, I have a bunch of videos. I even have a whole playlist here on my ParkNotes channel, so check that out. I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description. Now, sometimes people will ask, hey, what do I keep in my commonplace book? How do I find new stuff to put in there? Well, partially that will be determined by the type of commonplace book you keep. So if it's general, then again, you're just pulling from everywhere. But if you have a topic specific one, that's going to guide you. Here's the kind of stuff I want to put in this commonplace book. You can put quotations from your favorite fiction authors, from your favorite philosophers, from your favorite theologians, or you can even pull from peer-reviewed journal articles. And speaking of which, that reminds me of the sponsor for this video, Consensus. I love Consensus, and that's because Consensus helps you find the best science faster. Consensus is an app that helps me answer my questions. It helps me learn by pulling insights only from peer-reviewed research. And it does this without scraping the entire internet like other AI tools. It's seriously a fantastic tool. So here's how I use it. I just go to Consensus. I pick a yes or no question that aligns with my interests, usually something about journaling and improving mental health, or a question like, do paper journals help mitigate the effects of ADHD? So you just type that in and Consensus gives you a whole list of peer-reviewed articles answering that question. And it will literally help you answer the question by going through a pro analysis of the findings. But what's even better is that you can find the citations that are used in the pro analysis, and you can just click on those and go to the individual papers that contribute to the analysis. So you don't have to wonder where your answer is coming from. You can go and check the sources yourself. This is fantastic. It helps you cut right through opinion-based content and delivers real research-backed insights. So I just started incorporating Consensus into my workflow, but it's already been beneficial in helping me find the peer-reviewed articles I wouldn't be able to find otherwise. So I've been loving Consensus, and I know you guys will too, so check them out with my link below. Okay, so I forgot to mention that students get 3 months of premium Consensus for free, and then 40% off for the rest of their time using it. And all you have to do is sign up with your school email. So that's awesome. Big thanks to Consensus for sponsoring this video. Now let's jump in with 3 ways to make commonplaces. Okay, so like I said in my working definition, a commonplace book is a collection of quotations, and they're usually kept in a notebook, which is organized according to a particular scope and for a particular purpose. We already covered that with the 4 kinds of commonplace books, but commonplace books are often organized according to common places or common themes, common headings, common categories. And so I think these common places are often left off of the commonplace conversation here on YouTube today. But common places can be super beneficial for helping you find that quotation when you need it for your paper or for your sermon, or when you need it for the finishing touches on that Facebook comment that's just going to devastate your aunt or something. Commonplaces are how scholars and philosophers and thinkers used to go about finding quotations when they needed them. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about the history of commonplace books and how they started with Aristotle and how he coined the term commonplaces, koinoi topoi in Erasmian Greek and loci communes in Latin, how he used these commonplaces in order to organize his own argumentation schemes that he was collecting from other philosophers and organizing into one spot in his organon in order that his students could systematically study logical forms, logical arguments, syllogisms, the art of logic. So for Aristotle, a commonplace was just a common name or heading for a particular argument or family of arguments. This idea of a commonplace and a commonplace book, even though they didn't have books yet, they were probably still using scrolls, made it all the way to Cicero and then to Quintilian, and they decided to add quotations to their commonplaces as proof texts. So here's this logical argument, and then here's this famous rhetorician or politician or philosopher who used this argument to great effect, and here's the quotation to prove it. So because of the Roman rhetoricians, the concept of commonplaces and a commonplace book has expanded out to include quotations. And then that idea went up through history into the Renaissance, and it became what we have today, the commonplace book. And from the Renaissance on, we got all sorts of different styles of commonplace books. So commonplaces were there at the start. They were there with the Roman rhetoricians. They made it through the Renaissance and all the way up until today. But today, many of us have left off commonplaces from our commonplace books. Now, if you're keeping a topic-specific treasury commonplace book, it totally makes sense to not use commonplaces. I talked about this in my previous video on my Pocket Proverbs commonplace book. The whole thing is just a collection of sententiae, of wise sayings, of gnomic statements, just little, short, pithy aphorisms and proverbs and maxims. It wouldn't make sense to add a bunch of headings to those because the headings would take up the same amount of space as the saying itself. And I'm using that to stop scrolling. I'm using it to thumb through and become a wise person. So it doesn't always make sense to use commonplaces in your commonplace books, but if you're keeping any of the other 3 styles of commonplace books, using commonplaces will be really helpful for navigating your notebooks. So first up, we have ad hoc commonplaces. These are headings, these are categories that you put at the top of your quotation in order to help you navigate, but you do so as you go. So ad hoc is often heard in debates when someone comes up with a justification for their action or for their belief as they go instead of beforehand. Ad hoc reasoning is not great because it doesn't utilize forethought, like by definition. But the phrase literally means for this in English. And since I'm a pretentious public philosopher, I like to use Latin terms. Just kidding, partially, but really this is a great term for describing this first mode of generating commonplaces. If you Google ad hoc, then you'll see when it's an adverb, it means when necessary or needed. And as an adjective, it means created or done for a particular purpose as necessary. So creating ad hoc commonplaces is just creating as you go. So I added a new quotation and I don't see any headings in my commonplace book that fit it. So I'm going to create a new commonplace in order to categorize this quotation. If I already have a commonplace that fits it, like love, and that perfectly describes the quotation that I'm adding to my commonplace book, then I'll use love. But if not, and it's on justice and I don't have any quotes in my commonplace book that warranted me creating that commonplace, then I'm going to add it now. So in this first way of creating commonplaces, you're just adding them as you go. You're just adding them after the fact. You have the quotation. You're not looking to go out and find quotations to fit under that commonplace. You're creating the commonplace, the category, the heading as you go. So maybe you find a really good C.S. Lewis quote, and so you write C.S. Lewis on mercy, but it also fits justice, so you go C.S. Lewis on mercy, comma, justice. That is your commonplace. You put that at the top, you box it out, and then when you're thumbing through your commonplace book, you can see the commonplaces right there up at the top. Boom, that one's super easy. The second way you can create commonplaces is post hoc commonplaces. Now, post hoc is another Latin phrase which is often heard in a negative connotation. You'll usually hear this when someone is called out for the informal fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this. Now, it's an informal fallacy because the fallacy doesn't have to do with the logical form of the argument. The argument scheme isn't invalid itself, but nonetheless, it turns out to be poor reasoning. This fallacy is assuming that just because something Y came after something else X, then X must be the cause of Y coming about. But temporal succession alone is not a great indicator of causality. We need much more information to determine if X actually caused Y. All right, cool, but post hoc doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just means after this. Again, a quick Google search will yield the following. When it's an adverb, it means after the event, and when it's an adjective, it means occurring or done after the event. So that's all I mean by a post hoc mode of generating commonplaces. You generate them after. After what? Well, after you filled out your commonplace book with quotations. So you fill out your whole notebook, then you go back and read through the quotes and come up with categories that best pick out the quotes you already have. One benefit of this mode is that you get to see all the stuff you're working with and can abstract exact commonplaces from the quotes you already have. One drawback is that you have to wait until you fill in all your quotations, and that can take a very long time. What if you want to use your commonplace book before it's completely filled in? But then again, maybe you do this with your Zibaldone style journal. You're just adding quotations at will, and then eventually when that thing's filled up, you go back and you add post hoc commonplaces to help organize the Zibaldone into a commonplace book. This is not my favorite mode of creating commonplaces, but you may like it. And then lastly, the third way is anti or anta hoc commonplaces. Ante hoc means before this. So in this mode of generating commonplaces, you come up with commonplaces you will use in your commonplace book before you actually start filling in the quotations. Now, how could you possibly know all the categories you're going to need before you even start with the quotes? Well, this one works for topic-specific commonplace books much better than general ones. If you know the topic or the theme of the commonplace book before you get started, you can research and think through the types of categories you'll need. So for instance, if you're starting a commonplace book on the philosophy of mind, maybe you research topics in the field and you generate a list of topics to use as commonplaces like mind and consciousness and substance dualism and functionalism or conceivability argument or Mary's room or whatever else. So you make sure you're not leaving anything out that you'd like to collect quotes on, and then you make a list of your intended commonplaces in the front of your notebook so you can reference it. Then as you're reading and you find a worthy quote, you consult your commonplaces index and you pick out the best commonplace label for the quote. One drawback of this mode is that you may come up with commonplaces beforehand that you won't actually need. Likewise, you may also leave some off on accident because you started the list prior to your in-depth research. But that seems like an easy fix. Just leave yourself room to add to the list of commonplaces. And further, you can use the list as a kind of checklist to make sure you're researching the whole of the field and not just those areas that you like most. Maybe you keep finding quotes about consciousness, but like none on substance dualism. Well, you wanted to find quotes about substance dualism as well. I mean, you made the commonplace for that. So actively read more about substance dualism and add quotes on that as well. Okay, so there are your 3 ways to go about making your commonplaces in order to organize your commonplace book. The first is ad hoc. You're doing them as you go. The second way is post hoc. You fill out the whole commonplace book and then you go back and add them to help structure and organize and find the quotations you need. And then the third way is to use anti hoc commonplaces to come up with a whole list of commonplaces that you want to research, that you want to collect quotes under, and then you go about doing that. Okay, so let me give you an example. Usually I use my own commonplace books as the examples for my videos, but I thought this would be really cool to use the quotable C.S. Lewis. This is edited by Wayne Martindale and one of my mentors, Jerry Root. I absolutely love Jerry. He's the man. This is the quotable C.S. Lewis. It says it's an encyclopedic selection of quotes from the complete published works of C.S. Lewis. So it says it's encyclopedic, but an encyclopedia is a compendium. It's a souped up compendium about the whole of human knowledge. It's a compendium, which is just the facts, just the information, not quotations. That's fine. It's not saying it's an encyclopedia, but it is encyclopedic in that it is on the whole scope of Lewis's corpus. Okay, so really quick, you can see that these are quotations from Lewis, and they are organized according to different commonplaces. The quotations in this commonplace book are organized alphabetically, which is very helpful, but you'll see that some of the commonplaces are only used once. So you'll see glory, and here's a quotation on glory, but it's only got one quotation. Whereas the commonplace God has a bunch of quotations, but it also has secondary commonplaces to help you navigate. So here's the C.S. Lewis quote. The commonplace is God, and then also approaching him. So then we have God, completeness, God, creator, God, eternity, and then on we have with C.S. Lewis quotes on God and the subcategory or sub-commonplace of infinity or language about God or God and love. So you can see how helpful it is to have commonplaces and to have multiple or sub-commonplaces in order to navigate the quotations that you've collected in your commonplace book. One of my favorite commonplaces is reason, because I love reading C.S. Lewis and his thoughts on reason. So I'll just skip right here when I'm writing a paper on C.S. Lewis and I can't find the quotation in the book that I'm reading or in my own commonplace books. I'll go right to the quotable C.S. Lewis, and this will help me find it. It does feel a little bit like cheating because it's not my own, but that's fine. This is a really helpful resource if you're into C.S. Lewis at all. So that's the quotable C.S. Lewis. If you want to grab this book, then grab it from the link in my description to support my work here. I highly recommend this book. It is fantastic and a great example of a commonplace book. You can even use this to grab your own commonplaces. So that's another way to generate them, I guess, is to just jack them from somebody else. Super helpful book. Okay, so actually on the topic of stealing commonplaces for your own commonplace books, here I have the Syntopicon. This is the Great Ideas. This is from the Britannica Great Books, which which was overseen by Mortimer J. Adler, who's one of my favorite public philosophers. He's just the man. This Syntopicon is a collection of essays on the great ideas, and I would call this thing a compendium because it's not just about quotations, it's about abstracting out the information about those ideas. There are going to be some quotations, but it's much different than the quotable C.S. Lewis. So this is the first volume of the Syntopicon, and here's a half list of the great ideas. You can just grab these and use them for your own Commonplace books. Use these as commonplaces, especially if you're keeping a general treasury commonplace book. You're going to have quotations on all of these different ideas. So if you wanted to use that anti-hoc method of generating your commonplaces, then grab them from this list, and now you have a commonplace book on the great ideas and go out searching for quotations that will match this list. I really don't want to read 50 words for you right here. Hopefully you can see these. If you're watching this video in lower resolution, then make sure you go to the gear button and then turn up the resolution, make it 4K, and you should be able to pause and see these 50 ideas. So I'll give you a second, go ahead and do that, or just pause this video, whatever. But here is a whole list that you can use as commonplaces in your commonplace books. Okay, boom, hopefully you got those. Let me grab volume 2 here because that's going to be the rest of the list. And there you go. So there is 102 of the great ideas. This is the second half of the list. It has things like soul and man and mathematics, all things that can be used well as commonplaces. So if you need ideas for your own commonplaces, this is a great list, these 2 books, and then also the quotable C.S. Lewis. So if for some reason you can't view the list from this video, then check out my Substack. I'll just post the list on there, and then you can copy and paste or do whatever you want with it. All right, so that's it for the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys made it this far into the video, then you are awesome. Leave me a thinking emoji in the comments so I know who the real ones are. And then if you want to continue to dive deeper into commonplace books and compendiums and the distinction between a journal and a diary and all those kind of things, then check out my Substack. You can find a link to my Substack in the description. Check that out. There's a bunch of articles in philosophy, some in theology, and a bunch on notebooks. And if you guys like the work I do here on ParkNotes or over on my Substack, then please consider becoming a paid subscriber. Every little bit helps. It helps me buy diapers for my daughter and buy dog food for my dogs. Every little bit helps me justify this kind of work. All right, that's going to do it for now. I'll catch you guys next time.